So in the last two videos, we have built the miter sled, and we built the small parts add-on along with the stop block. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and tackle the last two accessories for this sled. Let's take a look at those. So the first one is going to be this miter fence, and that's going to attach the same way that the small parts catcher attaches with a hardboard top, and then we have a plywood fence. And then our last accessory is going to be this ripping guide, and this is to rip small parts to width with this sled. And looking at that, we have a plywood base, we have a hardboard top, and then we also have a hold down bar and a hold down, and that has some threaded inserts and knobs, so you can use that to hold your parts down to the sled as you're ripping. So let's go ahead and start by cutting. We'll go ahead and cut all these parts at once. Let's go ahead and start by cutting the miter fence block to size at the table saw, and we'll go ahead and take care of that rip fence block as well. Okay, so for our miter fence, we have two parts we have to cut. We have the miter fence block, which is part G, and we have the miter fence top, which is part H. So the top is going to be hardboard, and the block is going to be plywood. Now I've already trimmed those down to rough size, and I've laid out the lines we need to make. And these are 45-degree cuts that we're going to make this an accurate 45-degree fence. So I'm going to use the miter gauge with an auxiliary fence, and I've set that to 45 degrees, and I set that using my nifty plastic drafting square because I know it's an accurate 45 degrees. And we're going to start by making one cut, and then I'll rotate the fence to 90 degrees and make the opposing cut referencing off that 45-degree cut we just made. Once we have that all done, we'll go ahead and cut the parts for the rip fence while we're here. That's going to be the rip fence block, part I, and the rip fence top, which is part J. All right, so now that we have the rip fence pieces laid out, we can go ahead and cut this long bevel on one side. And I know I laid it out on both parts, but I'm gonna go ahead and save a step, and I'm just gonna tape these together and cut them both at once. Let's go ahead and just use some double-sided tape. Line that up. There we go. So now I can go ahead and cut that long angle cut all at once, and I know they'll match up once we get back to the bench to glue them together. And while we're here at the bandsaw, I went and grabbed this piece of maple, and this is going to become the hold down bar on top of the rip fence that our threaded inserts are going to go into. So here, this is just a simple piece of 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch hard maple, and I'm going to use the miter gauge and bevel the ends real quick. Then we'll head over to the bench and install some threaded inserts. All right, so we're at a point where we can go ahead and get these two jigs assembled. So let's start with the miter fence. Now, this is about as straightforward as you can get. We're just going to go ahead and glue the hardboard top onto the base, and I'm going to pin nail it just to keep it in place while we do the rest of it. Okay, so those pin nails will hold that while the glue dries. So let's go ahead and drill a couple holes so we can mount it to the track. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with that small parts catcher. We're going to position this on here and just mark the location of that center of that T-track. Okay. And we'll strike that line right across. Okay, now these holes are basically 1 inch in from the ends. So let's go and mark that. And then this is a little bit of a confusing dimension on the plans. If you look at detail A, the next knob for the opposite side is 6 inches from this knob location that we just marked. So let's go ahead and do that. It's there, there, Okay. Now we can go ahead and drill these holes. Okay. So that's basically all we're going to do to this miter sled. When we go over to the table saw to try this out, we'll throw the knobs and the T-bolts through there, get it attached, and we'll make our first cut to go and split it in half. But let's set that aside for now. And let's take a look at this rip stop. So, I'm going to pull it apart, get rid of that double-sided tape that I used. And same thing here, we're going to glue the hardboard top onto the plywood base. Okay, there we go. Now we'll set that off to the side and let's take a look at this guy. And this is the hold down bar. And those are the two ends that I beveled with the bandsaw. And I've pre-drilled holes, and those are for threaded inserts. And these are exactly the same way that we installed the threaded insert on the small parts fence. We're going to go ahead and get those in place. A good trick when you're installing threaded inserts is to chamfer the beginning edge of the hole. So on this top side, I've chamfered that edge. It just gives the threads a little bit easier grab and a little bit easier way to start. Okay, so both those thread inserts are in, and they're sitting a little bit below the surface, and that's important because we are going to use those threaded inserts to install this hold down fence. Now the fence is just hardboard, it's cut to size, and then over at the router table, I went ahead and formed 2 slots in there. And I did that by first defining the end of the slots at the drill press with a drill bit, and then using a miter gauge with a straight bit at the router table to connect those 2 holes and form the slot. And that slot is going to allow this studded knob to go through into that insert on both ends, and that's what will ultimately hold down your workpiece as you make a rip cut. So let's get these off here. And we're going to go ahead and glue this in place. And this is one that we're going to have to clamp. I don't think my pin nails will reach all the way through here. So I'm going to glue this and clamp this in place. Once the glue's dry, we'll head over to the table saw. We'll get everything attached and see how they work. So once we have our miter sled attached, our miter fence attached, we can go ahead and make that first cut to create the kerf, and then we go and test it out. And this one looks like it needs just a hair of adjustment, which is easy to do. I will just take this side off, sand this edge to bring it to an exact 45 degrees. However, that doesn't really matter, and let me tell you why. The way we cut this is I first made one 45-degree cut, then I squared up the miter gauge and made the second 45-degree cut referencing off that first one. So these 2 angles coming off the blade are complementary. That means that even if this is a little bit off, creating a 90-degree by cutting a second angle over here, it'll be dead on every time. Now, of course, that is if this corner is 90 degrees, which I verified it was before I made this cut. However, just for the sake of making sure I have a perfect 45 degrees, I'll take this off and sand this edge a little bit. But it's a great little add-on to have to this sled. So let's take a look at the rip fence now. Okay, so those knobs slide into place and then drops right over those, just like all other accessories that we've done. Now, here's where you do have to pay a little bit of attention to where this is positioned, because where you set this rip fence will dictate how wide your cut is. And for this, just to show how it works, I'm not terribly concerned about where it's set, so we'll set it at, let's say, 1/4 of an inch or so, and we'll install it there. So there's some fine tuning that you can do on this rip fence as well. Now obviously we want to make rip cuts on here, so we want this fence to be parallel with the blade. So if this thing happens to be skewed a little bit, that's easy enough to either come in and sand this plywood fence underneath where it meets up with the fence on the sled, or you can shim it with some masking tape, which is my preferred method if it is a little out. And we'll determine that after we make our first cut. So I have the fence installed here, the hold down fence, and that just slides up and down on these knobs. So I will go ahead and put my workpiece in there, and we'll push it down so it's tight and pinching against, the fence is pinching against my workpiece. And there we go. That's pretty much locked in place. So let's go ahead and make this cut. You will want to make sure that your blade is low enough that's not going to hit those brass knobs either. Okay, and that's out just a little bit, so I'll just shim this up with some masking tape or maybe some blue painter's tape. We'll get it aligned. But let's head over to the bench and take a look at everything together. I have a little bit of cleanup left to do on this, or I might choose not to. You know, there's a few bevels that I could use a little extra sanding on, but honestly, it's a shop project and it's a tool to be used in the shop. So the type of finish you want to bring it up to is up to you. But honestly, the sled paired with the ripping attachment, paired with the miter fence and the small parts catcher, they make a great ensemble for your shop. Even if you don't use or make projects with small parts, this sled's sized perfectly for even medium-sized projects. And I really think you'll benefit from building one for your shop. So what are you waiting for? Get into your shop and build one.